As I'm sure we're all familiar with, the theme of this conference has to do with finding solutions to impossible problems, something I think climate change fits into perfectly. The recent emphasis on the environment and reversing the catastrophic effects of climate change has made sustainable and renewable energy an important subject for countries to look into developing. I specifically researched geothermal energy in Iceland because about 90% of the electricity used in Iceland comes from renewable energy, and about 25% of that energy comes from geothermal power stations specifically, which makes them a great example. So, that leads into the question of what is geothermal energy exactly? Well, geothermal energy is harnessing the heat from within the earth by bringing up the water and steam that's deep under the surface and using it to power turbines. Those turbines create an energy that can be used in so many ways, from heat to generating electricity. Keeping that in mind, generating electricity requires higher temperatures, so being near a tectonically active area is ideal. And it just so happens that Iceland falls along the Mid-Atlantic Ridge. This Mid-Atlantic Ridge is a major fault line and is therefore incredibly tectonically active, which is another reason why Iceland was a great place for geothermal power stations to be. However, there are downsides to living in such a tectonically active area, volcanic activity and earthquakes being two of them. Prior to the 20th century, Iceland was a struggling developing country that was very dependent on peat and imported coal. Lying along the Mid-Atlantic Ridge, volcanic activity had destroyed farmland too, and it led to a famine in the early 1800s. Started by a farmer in Reykjavik, the country began using geothermal energy in the early to mid-1900s and allowed their standard of living to become one of the highest in the world. Being an incredibly tectonically active area had been a detriment to the country up until now, but it became a major contributor as to why the country was beginning to thrive. The breakdown of how Iceland used their geothermal energy is in the graph in the middle, and as you can see, it's used in so many ways. It's used to heat sidewalks and streets in the winter, heat swimming pools, provide hot water to farms, and it allows greenhouse usage to be maximized. The way that this is done is because the carbon dioxide that the power stations create as a byproduct can be reused for carbon dioxide enrichment in the greenhouses themselves, which minimizes the negative effects of this process. The growing industry of fish farming in Iceland also utilizes geothermal energy to heat the water used for the producing and rearing of the fish. So despite all these positives and all the potential that it has, there are a few drawbacks. Harnessing this geothermal energy works by taking fluid from permeable rocks. This causes pore pressure to decrease and it leads to land subsidence, or the gradual sinking of Earth's surface. Unfortunately, there's no way to prevent this, but geothermal stations can and often do inject water into depleted underground reservoirs to help support the surface. This, however, can lead to tectonic stress and result in more seismic activity. Another consideration that needs to be taken into account is that when you're using the water and steam within the earth to carry the geothermal energy to the surface, low concentrations of hydrogen sulfide, which is a colorless but poisonous gas, are released. Geothermal fluids also contain a few other toxic materials, and while the presence of these toxins is incredibly low compared to other methods of resource extracting, such as fracking, toxins can accumulate enough to be harmful eventually. That all being said, however, geothermal energy is still a renewable and sustainable source that can contribute to a country's economy and their quality of life. Because of its renewable and sustainable properties, this form of harnessing energy can replace other forms of energy use that are more harmful to the planet, like fracking, which we mentioned earlier. And for the countries that are noted by the World Geothermal Congress for being the main producers and consumers of geothermal energy, their increased geothermal energy use led to a decrease in dependency of imported fuels like fossil fuels, as well as a decrease in carbon and greenhouse gas pollutants. And then in most countries, geothermal energy sourcing has been slow, unfortunately. Despite its clear environmental benefits, there are still obstacles such as competition from cheap fossil fuels and the high investment costs. It's important to keep in mind that yes, geothermal energy is an investment to make, but it's proven, like I mentioned before, that it can contribute to the economy of the countries who utilize it. A few more countries have begun to lay the foundation for harnessing the energy underneath Earth's surface, and at the rate that oil and gas supplies are being consumed, soon these finite resources will be depleted, and energy sourcing such as geothermal energy will become more appealing and very much more necessary.